The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
This week on Garden Connections, we're getting ready to start a flower garden. Is your green thumb ready? Stay with us. You're watching Garden Connections. Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm Amy Whitaker. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to introduce Tom Thiesfeld, who is here to help us start a flower garden. We welcome your participation in preparing for spring planting. Call in and pose your question. I said that right. Thiesfeld.
Thiesfeld, yep.
Thiesfeld. Okay. So today we are going to talk about flowers. Now I know there are lots and lots of options for flowers. We've got annuals, we've got perennials, we've got bulbs. Where would you like to start?
Well, maybe we can just start here with the bulbs in front of us. First, I guess maybe we start in just the difference of flower, the colors that the flowers offer, the different amount of variety of colors, just how much that can lift up or make a house, make a yard look better. You know, just it's a generally, I mean, you can be as easy or as complex as you want to be, but even just a little splash of color just makes your yard stand out a little bit from everybody else's. So maybe the first, we'll pull some of these bulbs out. And bulbs are kind of funny because they're, you know, the stuff that's blooming now, tulips, daffodils, and stuff like that, spring blooming stuff, we plant in the fall.
Okay.
And then this stuff that we plant now is going to bloom during the summer here sometime, and then we're going to enjoy it in the summer, and then it'll be done.
So there are some bulbs that we should plant in fall for spring, and then others that we would plant in spring for summer color.
Yeah, so and that's the hard part is that the stuff you see now and you go, oh, I want to plant that. Well, you probably can't get the stuff until fall.
Okay.
So
planning ahead.
That's
then.
fun. So you got to plan ahead. So whatever you see that you like now, find the name of it, write it down, or take a picture or something, and then in the fall go into the store and they'll have that available. But this one here happens to be a gladiola bulb, and you see it's actually starting to kind of grow out of there. I mean, it wants to grow because it's been inside. It doesn't know how cold it is outside. But these are an example, and then there's dahlias here too. That's a picture of it, and they're an example of things you plant now. But if you want, they won't come back next year if you leave them outside, if you leave them in the ground. So we either got to dig them up and store them in our house or basement, or decide that we're just going to buy new ones next year and replant them. There are a few things, you know, like lilies come to mind, which lilies are one of my favorite bulbs to plant, and they look great, and they can just stay in the ground. So we'll see. So they'll come back year after year, and kind of like a tulip type of thing, and then they tend to spread a little bit, and more come up each year. So that's kind of a cool thing. Maybe that's why I like them, is because you plant them once and that's it. So this is just an example of you know, again, there's many different colors in all these things. You can find, you know, if you like reds or yellows or pinks or you know, blue, purple. You can kind of, you know, go according to what you like, and because that's what it's all about anyway, right?
Yeah.
What you like. It's your house. You plant what you like.
When we're talking about planting bulbs, do most of them have a pretty standard up and down? I know you're not supposed to plant them upside down, so how do you tell?
Right. Well, and most of them you can kind of tell. You know, this part that's growing out is obviously the top. Sometimes there'll actually be green things sticking out, but it's you know, it's a good point because sometimes it's hard to tell when you get it home and you go, you know, which end is up. So if you're not sure, before you leave the store where you're purchasing them, make sure you ask them so you get it straight, so you have the top growing up, because you know, otherwise it'll be flowering down in the ground, you won't see it, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, that is very important to make sure the top is up.
Okay. So just kind of look for either something that's growing a little bit for the top, or it looks almost like that's got roots.
Yeah, sometimes you can see the roots. I mean, they're not real big on this particular one, but you know, the scraggly things sticking out are probably the bottom.
Okay. And then you've got another type over there.
Yeah, and this is the dahlia. This is a really weird looking bulb. And you can see this one, again, is starting to grow a little bit on its own. So that's a funky bulb. It almost, I don't know what it looks like. Bagpipes, I guess. I don't. But again, that's one that if you plant it now, it'll bloom. It'll be gorgeous. But you have to dig it up if you don't want to replant it next year. If you don't want to buy new, I should say.
Are there any special requirements for bulbs as far as sun or shade or fertilizer?
Well, most things, period, that flower like the sun. And I'm sure that's the question everybody has at home is, what can I plant in the shade? And maybe we can talk about that a little later. But most things tend to like a good portion of the day sun. And then you can get there, sometimes there's specific bulb foods, or some people use bone meal to plant, stuff like that. Or, you can maybe even use, once you haven't planted, just some regular, this fertilizer you're using on your flowers might work too. But you can get a special if you want to buy special fertilizer for the bulbs and something different for the flowers and something different for the vegetables. You can sure do that, or you might be able to just buy a multi-purpose one and use it for all of them. Then this is kind of fun. The most economical way to grow these flowers would be from seed, because you can get a lot of seed for not much money. But the negative thing, of course, is they're not flower. They're going to take a while before they flower. For instance, this is marigold seed, and it's really kind of cool because it's really a funky, fuzzy seed. It's kind of two-tone in color. And I like planting marigold seeds. I always plant them in front of our shed each year. But this takes about 9 weeks to flower. And this is a marigold you could go buy today, and obviously it'd be flowering. But you're going to pay about the same price for this whole packet of seeds as you would this 4-pack of flowers. So again, it depends on how much you want to spend on it. If you want color right away, people that are doing graduations and stuff like that don't have 9 weeks to wait for this seed to come to flower. So you got to go with that.
I suppose you could probably get seed and start it early indoors if you wanted
Yeah, you could start indoors, but you're too late for that.
Yeah.
That's another way to do it is you can start it in, you can buy packs like this, empty and fill with dirt to start it yourself, and you save some money that way doing that yourself.
How long would you think it would be like if you bought like gladiola seed versus bulbs? I don't even know if it's out there. But
yeah, I don't know. I've never seen gladiola seed, I guess. So, yeah, I don't know. But the bulbs, the other thing cool about some of these bulbs, too, is they will, year after year, you can dig them and they will split.
Okay.
So, you can get, you will end up, if you do the work and save them and dig them, you can get
so that's
more and more bulbs of some of these different bulbs.
Best way to get them to multiply.
So, yeah, you kind of split the bulbs if they get big enough.
Okay. So when we're talking about seed, are most of the seeds we are going to plant be for annual flowers or perennial flowers, a little bit of both?
Generally, it's annual. The seeds that you find commonly, there are some perennial flowers you can find, or flowers that drop seeds and will come back from seed. The best perennial flower, I guess I can think of as some kind of wildflower mix. If you find one, definitely find one that are native to this area. And of course, that's what they do. A lot of them, they end up dropping the seed anyway, just naturally. And that's a fun thing too, is to see sometimes you can go in ditches and stuff and see some of the wildflowers that just kind of grow on their own, and then you can try to find that flower. Sometimes it's hard because they'll get, birds do a lot of planting and bringing stuff in, and you can't always find the exact flower or grass. Grasses are another thing that are decorative that go with the flowers. You can get some tall grasses, people like that will mix well with flowers.
So most of the seeds are going to be annual seeds. Do you find very often that annual seeds end up reseeding themselves and coming back from year to year?
There's quite a few that do, and that would be a good question to ask before you buy this. If that matters to you. Some people don't. The one I think of the most is the morning glories. They'll climb a fence, and we did that one year. We planted it one year, and then we had it for the next 3 years. And then they got it to the other side of the yard too, because they'll either you threw some of the old stuff over in a pile, or the birds moved it or something like that, and all of a sudden you have morning glories here and morning glories there, which is generally a good thing. But if you're trying to control things, or if it's something you end up not liking, then it's maybe a problem. But like again, that's kind of what they do naturally in nature. Is they grow seeds. That's how they survive. That's why we still have them. Is they grow their own seed and then they drop. And if they can survive the Minnesota winter, they come back.
Yeah. Do you find very often that with annuals they reseed themselves even within the season? Like this marigold is ready to go and will probably start dropping seeds relatively quick.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's very possible that it will. More will come. It'll thicken up. Again, the birds like to. Birds can move things quite a bit.
So by August, you might find marigolds up in
your
your
lawn.
lawn.
Somewhere else, yeah.
Well, yeah, annuals are, they seed readily from
Right.
my experience. If it's a long enough growing season, I've seen things pop up all over the place that have been like.
The other
"How'd
thing
you get
nice about
there?"
annuals, when we haven't really compared annuals and perennials, but if you need color right now and you want it, most annuals flower all summer long too. If you take care of it and make sure you pull off the dead flowers and keep it watered and keep it fertilized, you'll have color for most of the summer, anyway, or all of the summer in some occasions. So if you're looking to add color, the negative thing obviously is you have to plant it every year.
Yes.
That must be why they call it annuals. You plant it annually, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a disadvantage of the annual is that you have to do it. Of course, some people do that. Pots and stuff. If you're making pots on the patio, annuals are what you're going to use. If you put a perennial in the pot, they're probably not going to make it anyway.
Yeah.
Especially here.
There are some annuals you can even bring inside over the winter.
Sure.
They might look pretty tough by the time spring comes around.
There's a lot of people that do it. Hibiscus comes to mind as one that people do a lot of that. Bring it inside. And then this time of the year you start sneaking it outside, and then you bring it in because it got cold. But obviously they like to be outside in the natural light and the rain and all that stuff. But a lot of them you can keep them inside. If you do bring them inside, it's always smart to do something before you bring them in for insects, in case there's insects. I've heard that a lot where people bring a plant in and then they go, "Oh, I got bugs at my house now."
Yeah.
So if you're bringing it in, treat it. Of course, that would be in the fall, obviously, but treat that pot with something before you bring it inside.
Yeah, I know I have some tropicals like jasmine and dracaena, the big red spikes that I bring in and out. And usually about this time of year, I only have about 4 leaves left on the jasmine. And it's looking pretty tough. But it seems like as soon as it gets back out into that fresh air and light and rain.
It's that tropical Minnesota weather.
Yeah,
that brings them back to life, yeah.
That we've had so much of recently. So you were talking about advantages and disadvantages of annual versus perennial. When we're talking perennials, what would be some advantages and disadvantages of those?
Well, first of all, maybe the disadvantages, they're obviously, they cost you more, a fair amount more. It's to do a large area of perennials is kind of an investment. You want to make sure it's something you like. They all flower probably at different times. So you want to make sure, you might want some that flowers early and some that flowers later in the fall. To keep that in mind when you're doing that. Obviously the big advantage of a perennial is you only have to plant it once. Although it doesn't mean you plant it and forget it. There's maintenance to do on it, whether it's cutting it back or you still have to deadhead the flowers. And all of these flowers are going to take water when when it gets warm, and it will get warm eventually. They just need to be kept watered. You can't just water it and forget it. It's not a tree. It's once they establish, they're still going to take water for a long time.
How do you feel about mixing like all of these things into one garden?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea to get some. First of all, you'd have the early spring, the annuals that are the early spring flower, and then you have those perennials that just kind of come up. It's kind of cool. Once you establish a perennial garden, you kind of sit back in the house and maybe throw some annuals out there in the spring so you got the color, and then you kind of watch everything else kind of pop up. And then it's like your garden just kind of comes to life right before your eyes.
So when we're putting bulbs in between these types of plants, what do we have to watch out for? Like if we want, tulips in between our perennials and some annuals in, is there anything in particular we need to be careful about?
Well, you have to watch a little bit when they flower, to make sure that you don't want everything in one section coming up and knocking each other over. And also maybe the size. You don't want something tall shading out the sun from something else. So that's a big thing. And again, most of it is going to like, you know, at least part to mostly sunny. So you want to make sure it gets its sun and its water. And I mean, I suppose you want to make sure your spacing is good, so they're not fighting over, because they're going to fight over the nutrients in the water and all that stuff in the ground. So, make sure they got enough to go around.
I've heard of people actually putting some of the early spring bloomer or fall planted bulbs in between like stuff that comes up later, so that they're almost in the same area, but by the time your tulips and stuff are dying back is when maybe your phlox is really starting to, come up and flower. Is that, a pretty common practice?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a great idea. If you kind of have to manage it a little bit to make sure you know where everything is, so they're not not coming up on top of each other. Or when you dig a plant, you don't dig up your tulip bulb and cut it in half.
I suppose.
But yeah, that's definitely great, and I think that's maybe the goal for most perennial beds or flower beds, is to get everything so it just kind of works like clockwork, and all you got to do is add a little water and fertilizer, and clean up the stuff as it dies off for the year. Then you're good. You just sit on the deck sipping lemonade and watch the flowers grow.
There you go. Well, when we're getting our flower garden ready, when we're preparing the soil and lining it up, what might we need to do to get that soil ready for them?
A good thing always to do is add any kind of organic matter you can add. Always helps to loosen up the soil. Adds nutrients over a long period of time. You can add fertilizer certainly, but that's usually just kind of a quick boost. So anything you can do, whether it's manure or compost or peat moss or something like that, that adds long-term value and also loosens that soil up a lot, because it can, they got roots that are going to want to go and grow, whether it's annuals or perennials. The roots are still going to want to grow, and you just have to make sure that it can easily do that. And actually, we can look at this. We're speaking of roots. Sometimes these plants, when you pull them out, there's a lot of roots in there. So it's real root bound. So it's a good idea. If you just plant this, it may keep that shape. So you want to make sure just to break them up a little bit. It doesn't hurt to actually rip these apart, whether it's annual or perennial or whatever. You actually tear those apart so that they go outward. You want them to go outward to get established, and they'll go. No, I made a mess. So they'll go. They're going to go looking for water. And if it's just in that one area where they are, it's not going to. It's only going to find that small amount.
So get those roots to spread
So yeah,
out.
don't be afraid to break up the roots, and that's on anything. I mean, trees and shrubs and whatever, you can, be more careful with the small stuff. But the bigger stuff, you can actually, break it open with a shovel. So make sure the roots go out. Make sure you've got that when you dig that hole, that there's some nice loose soil underneath too, so the roots aren't going. That happens too. Sometimes you dig the ground and it's as hard as this plastic container in here. And that's what's going to happen. It'll just go around in a circle, and you want it to go out and down, obviously.
So amending the soil is definitely important. Really, kind of no matter what you're planting, just making sure it's loose and
everything likes loose soil, and well drained soil. There's very few things that really want to sit in water. So that's another good thing, is that water will drain out. It always wants a lot of water, but it doesn't want to sit in it. It doesn't want to take a bath,
Yeah.
It wants a shower, not a bath, I guess, maybe you'd say.
And what can you tell me about these two plants that you have here? Why did you pick these particular plants?
Well, the reason I picked them mostly is because they're pretty. So, and again, it depends on, they happen to be two colors that kind of go together.
Okay.
Again, there's a lot of, you can pick yellows if you'd rather have yellows, or, there's whites. Can kind of mix it in. This one's kind of cool. I really like the leaf on this. It's really kind of a dark, rich, kind of heavy, thick leaf.
It's kind of a reddish color too.
Yeah, it's got that kind of that red stripe in the middle, and then kind of goes out. So that's another cool thing. I mean, we always think of flowers, what colors of flowers, but sometimes you look at the actual leaf and the green, and then it makes this flower show up more just because of that the nice thick dark green and red color of the leaf. Where this one doesn't have much for leaves, but a lot of flowers.
Looks like it would kind of spill over pretty nicely, complement each other. Now, as far as sun requirements, are these guys about the same? So here, this is phlox.
I think they'll probably stay on there.
sun or part sun.
And this says part shade, but you know what's the difference between part shade and part sun, right?
Yeah. So they would.
So, yeah, they're all going to want. I mean, you know, obviously things, you know, in August when it's really hot, if it's just sun's beating on them, they'll get, you know, it could get kind of crispy. But so you want to make sure that they get enough sun without. And again, they're going to take more water, and they may need they maybe wouldn't mind a little break from the sun in the middle of the really hot spell.
Afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, most annuals I found are kind of like that. You know, if they're
Sure.
especially in containers or something
Right,
that
when they're
dry out
limited.
easily.
Yeah, and that's another good point. When you put it in, you know, when you limit something, obviously the container is bigger than like in here, but the same thing can happen even in a bigger container. And you notice, like when you water that, the extra water runs out the bottom. So you're not really, you might have sat there and watered it for 10 minutes, but it only took the water that it could hold. So it's not necessarily going to last longer just because you put a bunch of water on it, because a lot of that maybe just ran off.
And I just had a question. How do you know if it's getting too much water or not enough water? What are the symptoms you can look for?
Well, obviously, if it isn't getting enough water, you'll start to see it dry, or, you know, most of these things will kind of wilt for a while first before I mean, it's not like they're going to shrivel up and die in a half a day. And a lot of times when you water, I guess we say, if you start watering in it and it's like puddling and running away, then you're really not doing much good because it's really absorbed all the water that it can take. The other thing we like to do is water it a little slower. You know, maybe turn the hose down so that water can actually suck in, especially with perennial stuff, because it's really important to get those roots to go deep. So if you're just watering the surface area that deep, the roots they're going to just get all the water they can from there. But if you can get it to go down farther, they'll establish better, and then they'll last longer.
So stuff that's planted actually in the ground, maybe less
Right.
frequent but deeper waterings.
Right.
How often would you say you would water a perennial bed?
Well, you know, that it's a little bit relative depending on the rainfall we get or the amount of sun that it has. It can dry out. You know, it's always a good thing to, you know, stick your finger in the ground, not just don't just touch the top, because a lot of times that might still be moist, but, you know, stick your whole finger in there and see if it's dry. You know, if it's dry 2 inches down, then it needs some water. And if it's wet there, then you know, wait a little while.
What about stuff that's staying too wet for too long? What might we notice on those?
Yeah, you'll see it. I mean, things can actually rot.
Okay.
And you can, you know, it's a little hard to. The easiest way to tell is actually look at their roots to see if they're starting to rot. But obviously, you're not going to pull everything you have out of the ground.
Yeah.
Look at the roots.
I don't know. I've noticed that sometimes you can actually lift up just the outer leaves and check to see
if there's getting a little mold.
See if there's mold or
Sure.
anything around the stems or down underneath in between the leaves. A lot of times that will indicate too much water.
Sure. It can get other fungus too. You know, if you have a lot of fungus problem, then it probably means it's got too much water, or it's you know, sometimes a lot of splashing water will spread fungus too. So it depends. You know, unfortunately, when it rains, we can't control that, but we can certainly control what we put on it.
What we put on it, yeah. After a rainy spell, it might be worth letting it dry for a few
Right.
days instead of getting right on top of watering them again.
And then you know, hanging baskets are something we haven't really talked about either. But you can obviously buy hanging baskets, or you can plant some of these annuals in baskets. You know, then again, you can about do anything you want. You can mix colors, mix things, have something that hangs over. Again, not everything has to be flowering. You can get ivy or something like that hangs over the edge with the flower in the middle. And you can, the nice thing about the flowers is you can be as creative as
Yeah.
you want to be. And with annuals too, it's kind of nice because you can be creative, and if it wasn't really that good, you
Yank
can
it up
start
and
over.
try something
You can
different.
start over. If it's a perennial, it's kind of hard to get yourself to pull that up if you spent
Or
maybe $15, $20 on
Maybe
a perennial.
find a new spot for
Right,
it
find a
or
different
something. How about topsy-turvy planters? Have you had much
A
with those,
little bit. It's kind of funny because some people say, "Oh, that worked great," and some people say, "It didn't work at all." So it might be again, watering on that. It might take a little more water than you think,
Okay.
because it's one, obviously it's pulling down, and when you water, I did one last year that did pretty good, but you notice when you water it, the extra water comes out the bottom, and then it does dries out from the top, and that's where the roots are trying to get. So you got to be a little careful with water. I also noticed I didn't think it would get blight. but it actually did get blight.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's maybe because that, when it pulled that water comes out, all the soil and water was coming out all over the top of it. So it might have been too much of that. And then, last year was pretty cool. So that's a good thing for fungus again, is wet, cold.
Yeah.
Really likes that.
So as far as like annual maintenance, it's basically going to be your fertilizing, your watering, your deadheading. How about for perennials, since they're going to be in the ground for quite some time? What other types of maintenance do we need to do with those?
You kind of have to watch them. Again, there'll be some deadheading to do. The flowers will die. Anytime you have dead things, whether it's a branch or a leaf or whatever, it can be pulled. Grooming it, sometimes it'll have to be trimmed.
Probably divided.
Yeah, it can be. If it gets too big, divided. Make sure it's the shape you want it to be.
And I have one more caller question from Terry. When do we want to divide peonies? And then also poppies, I believe. Do you know much about peony or poppy?
Poppies, I guess I'm not sure about dividing poppies.
I thought they just kind of seeded themselves.
Right, we tend to grow them from seeds. So they would be, I suppose that would mean it would be a spring thing. And then, peonies.
I was always told in the fall.
Well, they kind of die off, and then you kind of mow them off, and usually that's once the things have died. That's a weird thing because that's a perennial, but that's like an early perennial. So you don't want to mess with it when it's early, when it wants to flower and grow.
Yeah.
But then when it kind of stops, whatever, kind of growing for the year, it kind of wants to get ready for winter.
Might notice it kind of start to yellow up a little bit, and leaves start to die off. No more blossoms on it.
Then it's getting ready to die back, and then pull it out and have at it.
Sounds good. And our half hour is up. So for more information, log on to ksmq.org and click on Garden Connections. You can catch past episodes, join the blogs, and tell us about your garden experiences. You can also email the show. The address is garden@ksmq.org. Now that you're ready to grow your flowers, tune in next week when we'll talk about cutting your flowers for arrangements. I'm Amy Whitaker. See you next week.